This time we are going to talk a bit more about moral relativism. We're going to do another video on this because it's one of the most important moral stances these days, and I think a lot of people feel very drawn to it. There's a culture of professional behavior which kind of encourages people not to pass any moral judgment or any substantial judgment on anyone's behavior. It's kind of a paralyzing fake professionalism which benefits businesses that want to get away with all kinds of nasty behavior, especially internationally, global large businesses. And it's also very useful for politicians and those people who would like to just keep employees, civilians in check. Sadly, this couples well with the attitude of never make a judgment, never upset people, never offend people. Of course, we should be reasonable, tolerant, and sensible, but moral judgments are very important, and almost all philosophers agree that there are probably some objective standards by which, at least on a couple of topics, every human being can be judged by the same standards connected to murder, rape, exploitation, misusing political power, torture, and so on. The problem with cultural relativism is that it dresses refraining from judgment as an intellectually respectable attitude. Oh, I'm so enlightened, I don't judge people. I don't say that, honor killings are wrong, or I don't say that occupying land for religious reasons is wrong, or I don't say that overworking people is some countries is wrong, because those are other cultures and these are their values and I can't judge them. Obviously we can't judge all these cases very easily because the bad things happen to other people who feel and think in substantially similar ways to us. But still, cultural relativism is a position that has some intellectual merit and support, and it's worth looking at what the problems with it are. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to look at a brilliant article by James Rachels titled The Challenge of Cultural Relativism, where Rachels looks at some of what's sensible about cultural relativism or moral relativism, and some of what is very misleading and mistaken. So Rachels' paper is very short, and it begins with a story, as many good philosophy papers do, right? And the story harkens back to the ancient Greek times, where one of the rulers hears about two different cultures. One of the cultures buries their dead in the ground, like most of Europe and the US does up to this day. I think most of North America. And the other culture, people eat, probably just symbolically, some small piece from their deceased loved ones, but this has some role in showing their belonging, their respect for those people. Now we could imagine also culture where burning a dead body is preferred, cremation. Japan, where I live these days, is a country like that. And what many people take away from this kind of story is that, of course, how we say farewell to our loved ones is deeply important. It colors our perception of how our relationship with them was. Did we manage to give them a respectful and caring goodbye? Did we really show with the way we helped to close their lives, the lives of the existence of their body, that we deeply cared about them, respected them, we gave an opportunity to other people to pay their respects, and so on. If habits are so different about such an important central topic, and you could also think about practices like marriage, raising children, finding a partner, starting dating, negotiating friendships. There are significant cultural differences among cultures. Then how could it be true that there are some moral rules governing behavior, some oaths, some strong shoulds that really tell us what to do or what not to do, what's permissible or impermissible, that are the same for every people? How could that be true? That's the question and the challenge of cultural or moral relativism. And it has a bite because we can see that there are many practices in different societies that are substantially different, and people still seem to be okay. These just seem to be different possible configurations in which human beings can live and be happy. But then why would there be any objective values or standards? Right. So what exactly does moral relativism claim, right? As philosophy, we want to identify the main claims. Rachel's list says that moral relativism or cultural relativism is a combination of 6 ideas. Different societies have different moral codes. There's no objective standard that can be used to judge one societal code better than another. The moral code of our own society has no special status. It's merely one among many. There's no universal truth in ethics. That is, there are no moral truths that hold for all people at all times. And the moral code of a society determines what is right within that society. If the moral code of a society says that a certain action is right, then that action is right, at least within that society. And the last claim is that it is mere arrogance for us to try to judge the conduct of other peoples. We should adopt an attitude of tolerance toward the practices of other culture. Now, Rachel's distills a core argument from these 6 claims, namely the first premise being that different cultures have different cultures have different moral codes. Therefore, there's no objective truth in morality. Right and wrong are only matters of opinion, and opinions vary from one culture to another. Some of these claims, the central claims, are surely right? It's obvious that different societies have different moral codes. Nobody would challenge that who is even a little bit educated about the world. There's no objective standard that can be used to judge one societal code better than another. That's a totally different game. What could such standards be? The people who think there are such standards look at humans and look for shared concerns, abilities, values, psychological fundamental building blocks. We'll come back to this. But just because societies have different moral codes, it could be that only one of them is right, and they have the objectively right one, or they all get it wrong. But there is still an objectively right standard. Think about science for a moment. For a very long time, people thought that the sun revolved around the earth. And for a long time, people also believed in most places in the world that the earth was flat. These were both factually false beliefs, even though the majority of people managed to get by, and smart people even managed to calculate calendars, dates, predict things like partial occlusions of sunshine and so on correctly and based on these things. But they were all wrong. And later we found the truths about these things as we advanced. Now, the same could be true about morality. Most of us could still be in the dark. Maybe some cultures have got some things figured out. Number 3, the moral code of our own society has no special status. It depends. It's not about whether mine is better than yours. It's about, did we get the facts right? There's no universal truth in ethics. Again, it's just an assumption. Just because people don't agree, it doesn't mean that there isn't a truth, right? Often two politicians will say different things. It doesn't mean there isn't a truth. One of them might be lying, or both of them might be lying. Both of them might just be revealing part of the real story behind the events that they're describing. Truth exists independently of what people think and say. The moral code of a society determines what is right in that society. Now, this is very interesting. If there are some objective standards, then those would determine what is right and wrong about certain types of actions. But it might be true that morality only applies, or universal morality at least, to a handful of action types, behaviors. Maybe it's quite detailed, maybe it's not. Maybe a lot of the rules that we live by really are up to different cultures because they are beneficial and contribute to the welfare in similar ways, even though they're different sets of norms or rules. You could think about how in East Asian countries, a lot of people prefer to follow the leadership of older people and defer to them in many things, whereas in many European countries and North America, people prefer to encourage a kind of individual free thinking from an early age. People are encouraged to learn how to work alone at school, how to make choices alone, how to take responsibility alone at a very early age. But in both societies, people can be quite happy and live well, and we see that economically both kinds of societies can thrive, they can achieve similar technological advancements, and so on and so on. It is mere arrogance for us to try to judge the conduct of other people. Now, why would it be? This is only true if it would be true that there is no objective standard, a big assumption, nothing has supported so far, and also if we would not be able to form correct judgments. That is, even if there are no objective standards, each culture has its own different sets of norms, we would never be able to learn that. But why would we not? It's just similar human beings living in other cultures. If you move to another country, spend a substantial amount of time there and make a genuine effort, I think most people can learn the rule system of other cultures pretty well, often. So many of the claims don't seem to be very well supported, and that questions also what exactly tolerance should mean, right? Rachel's unpacks these things in a bit more detail in his papers, and basically the way he phrases the point about the first claim is that the first statement, that there are different rule systems, it's a fact, sure, that's the case. But the second one, that there is no objective truth, is about something entirely unconnected. It is about what is really true. But what people believe does not affect what is true. Of course, there are other problems with cultural relativism or moral relativism. It's true. It suggests that each culture has its very own values. But that seemed to undermine moral progress, the ability to learn from other cultures, compare cultures, look at different kinds of practices, and actually it would paralyze people even within their own culture, because it would mean that there is one set of rules and that's it. There's no discussion, there's no disagreement. That's obviously not true about most cultures. So both the diagnosis and the recommendation of moral realism or cultural realism seems to be faulty. You can think about cases to test your intuitions. Should women be allowed to vote? Well, in most parts of the world, women weren't allowed to vote until the early 20th or middle of the 20th century, and in some countries they still aren't. Should it be okay to have slaves? Humanity for most of its history has had some form of slavery. Even today, of course, there are significant, mostly illegal, but still some forms of slavery, and very large numbers of people live in relationships that are forms of slavery. Is it alright to kill people just because they have a different religion? Some cultures allow such practices or encourage such practices. Does it mean that just because some cultures are okay or even encourage such practices, they are actually good? Can a culture really serve as a standard that we all have to say, nothing we can do about it? Here is a way to think about this. Imagine someone tells you sometimes it's okay to just arbitrarily murder an innocent person. This person is from another culture from you, but you say, no, it's clearly, obviously, always wrong to murder an innocent person. But they reply, look, this is my culture, you're not from my culture, you can't criticize it. You cannot say such thing as this is right, this is wrong, this is bad, this is good. You're not in my rule system, and therefore you don't know the standards of justification. So you can't make a correct judgment. To this, if you take relativism seriously, you can say, well, my culture allows me to judge anyone. That's what my culture says. And my culture encourages me to force them to change in ways I think are good. The other guy says, oh, you can't force me to, even if you have a bigger military or whatever. You can withhold funding or cut business ties with bottom other sections. And you can say, sorry, that's what my culture says. You can't criticize or debate my culture. It's an absurd situation. From both sides, of course, both from the point of view of the culture allowing arbitrary murdering of innocents, but also from the point of view of the culture that simply allows bulldozing anyone else in order to force them to adhere to their views. But if cultural relativism is true, both of the participants in this conversation would be entirely right. Because according to the standards of their own culture, they would say and do what is correct, or something that is justifiable. Now, behind the whole thing is an assumption that people in different cultures are very deeply, fundamentally different. But this is highly doubtful. One of the examples that Rachel discusses that some people in certain cultures don't eat cows. Even people who are very hungry or don't have any food respect this rule normally. Then again, here in Japan or in Europe or US, most people eat cows. If they don't, it's for reasons of protecting the environment. Cows are pretty horrible for the environment, or objecting to the cruel treatment of animals in factory farming, which is also very sensible, of course. But it's a very different reason for not eating cows, and there's a very small number of people still. Hopefully it's going to grow back. Yeah, anyway. In cultures where this is a mainstream thing, everyone adheres to this almost exclusively, and it's on religious grounds. This seems to make the thinking and values of people in those kinds of countries fundamentally different. However, it can be explained that there is actually a deep similarity behind the practices. In Europe, Japan, North America, South America, nobody believes that, or very tiny numbers of people believe that a cow could be someone we knew in their previous lives. But according to some religions, there's a transfer of souls after death, and some animals may receive souls that belong to human beings. So, eating a cow or killing a cow could be the murder of someone we knew, or someone who was our relative, or someone towards whom we have other duties of non-harm and non-violence. Now, obviously, this concern with protecting people we care about is a common factor in these different cultures. So there's a really different actual practice but the reasons for the practice are that people care about not harming those who matter to them. And that's common. It's just the expression of the care that's modulated in some countries by religion or other kinds of views or ideologies. They might be political, they might be economical, they might be all kinds of things. Tastes, habits, historical accidents. So people are actually not that different. You can think about other things as well. You can think about how people in every culture care about their children. If they wouldn't, there simply would be no societies, because there would be nobody to carry forward the society. If there would be no one to carry forward the society, people would stop caring about anything that sustains a society, like building roads, ensuring that there is energy, ensuring that there is food, farming, ensuring that there is capital that can drive businesses, investment, technological development, ensuring that there are good laws that constrain how business people can use others' time, energy, that send criminals to prison, and so on. Nobody would care about this, but every society that's been stable for a longer time, definitely the about roughly 200 countries in the world that exist officially today, which are recognized by the UN, people do care about these things deeply. And it's almost all of humanity. They're not that different at every level, as we see. If you think more, there's also a very, very important core value that simply underlies human communication. And this is the principle of telling the truth. Of course people lie a lot. But think about it. Why does lying work? Lying works because every time we honestly communicate with someone, not when we are joking with friends or pulling leg of our bodies and stuff like that, but every time we have an honest conversation at work, we listen to someone talking on TV about an important public event, we talk to our friends about family matters and so on, we mostly assume that people tell the truth. If they don't, we're frustrated. If we know that someone systematically distorts the truth, we get upset, bored, or fed up with that person. And people who exploit this assumption that we normally tell the truth for gaining unfair advantages, they are in some cases sent to prison, in other cases shunned, morally judged, shamed. And that's a good thing. That's how we keep this in check, right? Because if we would not be able to assume that we can get true information from others, communication wouldn't work. If communication doesn't work, society doesn't work. If society doesn't work, we go back to being pretty smart monkeys, but alone we can't achieve anything. Nothing. There are no roads, no buildings, no industries, no technology, nothing. No heating, no electricity, no computers. Alone, humans are extremely weak and they're not capable of much. So, if you think about it, there's plenty that is shared among societies, and in many fundamental ways they work very similarly. Not to deny that there are many ways in which they are not. Now, there's one interesting controversial case that Rachel discusses at the end of his paper in a couple of pages. This is about female genital mutilation. It's a very tough topic. Some cultures allow girls' clitoris to be cut out at a certain age, usually early on in puberty. And there are different kinds of justifications that people offer. Some simply say, look, that's tradition, or that's recommended by our elders or our religious leaders. But some say, look, if women don't find sex so pleasurable, they're less likely to cheat, they're going to be more committed to their family, that's less disruptive for society and children, it adds to overall welfare and so on. I don't think any of these arguments are good arguments, but the interesting point is not that. The interesting point is that there's this extremely controversial and in some ways obviously harmful practice. if you challenge the people who engage in it and who support it, they will try to reason with you. They will try to provide arguments. They will try to find a common point of view where you can realize that, oh right, okay, we're not loony, these people are not loonies, they're doing something that from their point of view makes sense. Now, occupying such a shared point of view is only possible if you share some concerns and abilities that enable us to look at things from the same way, right? A concern with the general welfare of society is such a shared thing that every human being is able to have. Now, the context in which Rachel brings us this example, go and read the paper. It's a really good paper. It's only about 12 pages or so, and he describes a real life case where a girl escaped from her home country where this practice is sadly still common, and applied for asylum in the US, and there is a big public debate whether she should get asylum and whether it's fair to judge this kind of traditional practice as wrong, as harmful. Now, obviously, there's a lot of evidence that genital mutilation or female circumcision, if you want to use like one of these corporate sanitized phrases, has health dangers. There can be infections. People can't enjoy sex as much. There can be psychological damage. There can be all kinds of other problems, complications. It is linked with higher rates of cervical cancer and a few other things. So there are some objective harms, but of course, overall, what you want to say is that if we really want to say that it's wrong, we have to say that one, a concern with someone being able to enjoy sexuality, or someone having autonomy over what is done to their body, are very important universal concerns. And basically, the cultural relativists would say, no, that's only important in your culture. But the practice doesn't seem to show this. The practice seems to show that very often when you discuss this with someone who is from such a country and culture, they'll say that, well, look, I see your point, but these harms are outweighed. So they recognize that we are on a common platform, despite our different cultural backgrounds. Which is again showing that the way moral relativists, cultural relativists see moral systems, cultural systems as isolated, cut off from each other, is very unrealistic and contradicts how people think about and look at morality in real life. Now, all these things together seem to show that, as long as we are cautious and respectful and knowledgeable, we educate ourselves, that's our duty obviously before we judge someone and our culture, it's perfectly fine to criticize others, which shows relativism is wrong, of course. So, I think this is an excellent article. Again, something I very much recommend to read, go through, digest on your own, reflect on, talk about it with your friends or family. And the paper, of course, emphasizes the positive aspects as well, right? Rachel notes that just because someone would say, oh, we need to be respectful and tolerant if we accept cultural relativism, those are good things. It's actually quite empty what they're saying, because if we really think that there are unbridgeable gaps between cultural value systems, understanding is barely possible, judgment is not impossible in lack of shared standards, fundamental basics, we can't learn, we can't help each other to improve, we can't help each other to criticize, and our tolerance won't be very virtuous. Tolerance is virtuous if we recognize that we have different preferences from someone, but they're not harming us or anyone else, and we just accept their difference. We don't try to enforce uniformity just for the sake of uniformity. But it doesn't mean that if something is genuinely harmful, if something is wrong, we don't criticize it. That would be a very impotent and destructive form of tolerance. And it's very harmful to any society that would promote such a notion of tolerance. Some people these days are very, as I mentioned, afraid that they will be labeled a bigot, a racist, intolerant person, or ignorant person if they judge. And you know, these labels are thrown around a lot, sometimes very fairly. There are sadly in very high public visible, globally visible offices some pretty horrible people these days who probably fit many of those labels. But it doesn't mean that you can never make reasonable judgments. Judgments have to steadily be evaluated on their own. And sometimes some judgments will be valid and justified, and others won't. Not every judgment of someone's actions or values from another culture is showing a bias, or a bias that's a bad bias. So I'll leave you guys on that note. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you managed to take something away. And please keep thinking, keep reading, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.